Yo,
Yo,
sorry, I'm taking this from my car.
that's all good.
I've got a sick wife and had to be in charge of getting my son to school.
Responsibilities.
Yes. How are you?
Doing well. Just scrambling as always. It's like get up early and start the day, and then sure enough, it's like, you know, I'm sure you
Hmm.
know exactly what I'm talking about, where it's like, oh man, there was 4 hours till I had to do this, and then all of a sudden there's 2 minutes.
Yeah. Funny how that happens. Day
Yeah,
in and day out.
all day in and day out. And it's like, you always have these big expectations that I'm going to like get things done, but then I end up getting on a call and then I talk too much, and it's just like,
Mhm.
yeah,
It's funny, like that happens to even like guys like us who work from home. But can you
oh
imagine like
yeah,
if you were in an office surrounded by like 20 people that always want to talk all the time? How would you ever
yes.
do anything?
When we worked at Midwest Whitetail, we did exactly that. Like we'd go into the office every day, and there would be, your buddies in there, and we would talk and get distracted every day. And it's like now that we don't have that, you also see the downside to it, where like when we were together all the time, we could sit and brainstorm ideas constantly. I mean, we even lived together, but
Yeah.
I don't know. There's pros and cons to it.
Yeah, it's interesting how that stuff works out. I definitely do. While I like a lot of things about working on my own, doing my own thing in my own place, I do miss that just ability to collaborate with people. Like you said, spitball, bounce ideas off people easily. You do like when that's not right in front of you and available at any moment, you don't realize it, but you miss a lot of opportunities, I think.
Oh, for sure. I really just want to jump right into your take on the live stream cameras. As soon as I saw that pop up, I saw some people sharing it. Sat there and I watched the whole thing, and it got me excited because I've been, I don't know, kind of the last 5 years since we've started doing the hunting public and, traveled to hunt more. I've started to kind of see some of the negative sides, at least in my opinion, of trail cameras. And when you brought up the live stream thing, it was like, yeah, I think this is really starting to go down a dangerous road. And that's why as soon as I saw it, I was like, I gotta ask Mark if he'll, you know, talk about it with me and just hear some more of your thoughts and everything. And I mean, what happened exactly? Like, I guess I haven't even really seen any live stream cameras. So, just in general, like, what made you start doing that, and a little bit on your thoughts in case anybody that's listening hasn't necessarily watched that video.
Yeah, sure. So I have, ever since cell cameras first came out, I kind of looked at them with a concerned eye. Like, this sounds cool, but also this could seem icky.
Hmm.
And so right out the gate, I had questions about, the just the ethics of it, the effect it would have on the hunting experience, um, the fair chase kind of ramifications of it. So when I got, when they first came out, I was thinking these things. I got my first cell camera probably 5 or 6 years ago. I don't remember when that first Bushnell one came out, but that was the first one I ever got. And I got it, and I was like, all right, well, let's see what these things are all about. Let's kind of test the waters. And I remember using it and, thinking this is a heck of a tool, really helpful, especially like for me when I hunted in other states and stuff. I could, you know, get trail camera pictures that I would take me 6 hours to get otherwise to drive down there and drive back, 12 hours round trip. So I saw obviously, some really practical benefits to it. But I also right away thought, man, these things could be used in a way that just feels really far from what I think hunting is or should be, or at least fair chase hunting. And so one of the big things there with standard cell cameras that I thought was like, man, if you have these things on like immediate notifications, like it sends you the pictures right now, that just seems to open up like a can of worms where stuff gets like really, in my view, outside the lines of what I think is appropriate. So my kind of take with cell cameras early on was that, what, I feel comfortable with using these tools as long as it does not change what I'm doing in real time on a hunt in such a way that it's, less fair chase for the animal's sake. So by that I meant like if I could get a picture tomorrow, or sorry, if I got a picture and it came from yesterday, 24 hours removed from when the deer was actually there, there's nothing I can really do right now that's going to be different than if I would have went out there and pulled a trail camera card, you know, just a standard camera card, same kind of thing. In that case, I felt like, okay, this feels okay. And I liked the fact that with those cameras, you could set a delay. So I was able to make peace with cell cameras at the time by setting a 24-hour delay on my pictures. And that's what I've done ever since. So the last 5 years, I have used cell cameras, but I've kept them on a delay. So I was never put into a position where I was giving a piece of information that would be really hard not to use. But if I were to use it, I would feel really uncomfortable with what I was doing. The idea of me sitting in the tree somewhere and then getting a picture sent to me that says, "Oh, hey, there's a deer that you're after 150 yards around the corner." And, if I saw that right now and I know, oh, well, there's the deer right now, I know where he is because of this piece of technology, I could hop out of the tree and sneak over there and shoot him. Um, that for me was a line that was too far for me. So that's why I set that 24-hour delay. But in that, 5, 6 years since, um, you've seen the increased use of cell cameras as it's become more and more and more popular. The cameras have become more dependable, they're more effective. Um, and so more and more folks have started using them. They're pretty much, rampant now. Everyone's got them. Um, and that comes with the good and the bad of all these things I'm just talking about. So through all that, I've continued like wondering in my own head, like, man, where's this all going? You're seeing how people are using these things incredibly effectively. Um, and, a lot of people aren't setting any kind of line in the sand as far as like a 24-hour delay or anything. So lots of people are getting it right now and going and using right now. So all of that made me just uncomfortable. And I had this kind of rising discomfort about what was happening within like our community, I guess. And I know I won't get into the large like philosophical stuff, I guess, until you're ready to. But I think like there's this whole set of questions that are probably worth talking about that I did talk about in the video around like the ethics of fair chase and how there's these lines in the sand that we all have to draw for ourselves. There's like the legal line and then there's the personal line. And so I had drawn my personal line with that 24-hour delay. But then during ATA, a month ago or whatever, I saw a bunch of social media stuff about some new cameras that were coming out from, I think, Bushnell again, actually, maybe. Or was it Molster? I can't remember. I think Bushnell, but that doesn't really matter. Whoever it's from, they had released a camera with live stream capabilities. And I think one other camera company had done this prior, but I hadn't heard much about it. But this one came out from one of the major companies. I saw some of the really big name folks talking about how exciting this was to have live stream capabilities. And it just seems so outside of what I think is okay and what I felt comfortable with. And I very quickly could just see where this would take us. And I felt like it was just time to open this up to public conversation a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, because I think like I said, I had my own personal line in the sand. I had my thoughts. At the same time, I don't feel like anybody else has to necessarily feel the same way as I do. But while I didn't want to say like, hey, this is not okay for anyone to do or use, I did think that maybe an appropriate role for like me or you or any of us like is like leaders in the space, I think is like a fair thing to say. Like we have a platform. Um, I thought it was important to try to just put this up for conversation. And like as a community of hunters and bow hunters, like this is something we should start talking about and not let technology, what becomes available, force the issue. Instead, like why don't we make a decision as a group of hunters and people in this community about what we think is appropriate and what we think is fair chase hunting, rather than letting the companies dictate for us and then us just kind of, willingly take whatever they send our way. So that's a really long-winded way of answering your question.
Nah, that was
But that's
perfect.
kind of what got me to it.
That was perfect. I think that last thing you said is exactly why I wanted to have you on, is because I agree. Having the conversation about it is not even to say that if somebody's listening to this, I know that we're going to upset some folks, and I don't want to do that. That's not my intention with having this conversation. It's just to have a conversation, and these are all, I guess, anything that I say, same with you, I would assume it's just all opinion.
Yep.
Just, that's where I think this is kind of a touchy subject, I think. I will quickly give you my timeline of trail cameras and kind of what I went through personally with like kind of that line in the sand, I guess, but also what I wanted to get out of hunting, I suppose. When I was younger, I had the opportunity to use 4 trail cameras on my grandpa's property. I never bought one because I was always a punk. I wasn't going to go out and spend my money on a trail camera from the time I started hunting all the way until, never. I was never going to do it. It was always too expensive. And
Yep.
I'm at a point now where I could buy them. I just have kind of gone away from trail cameras. But for those few years I used them, they weren't very good. They were unreliable. And at that time frame, technology was kind of silly compared to what it is today as far as trail cameras go. And then I moved to Iowa, and the guys in Iowa were using trail cameras quite a bit. And at that point, again, I had already started kind of losing interest in them because the ones I was using were unreliable. Well, we started using them on public land and started just using the strategy of either put them in somewhere deep and leave them, or try to get some intel for where deer were headed, and therefore that would hopefully tell us where they were coming from.
Yeah.
And ultimately, in 2015, Aaron and I went into a spot that we had set up a tree stand just before the season, and the reason that we went into that spot is we had checked a trail camera, and there was actually several nice bucks on the camera up closer to the access, but on a ag field. There was beans, and the deer were going up there. And we went in there that evening, had an awesome hunt, on top of the fact that there was deer going up to these bean fields from the bedding area that we were beside. There was pin oak acorns that were all over the place, and they were just going nuts back there. It was a cold front day. October 16th, major cold front. It was awesome. And we ended up killing a buck back there. And at that point, I was like, man, that was pretty slick. Here we've used this camera to know that one was there. And we went in, physically checked it, and that was part of the strategy, was put it up on the ag field where we weren't necessarily going to hunt, but where we knew deer would be spending time at night. But just like that, it worked. And, there was a whole bunch of different examples. At the time I was filming Bill Winkie, and, he was obviously using trail cameras on private land. And then there was other guys in the office that were using them on public and private. And I started to also see, just from the standpoint of stressing yourself out, how much that can impact you
Yeah.
by trying to, see the one that you want, and how much stress that can create, and how much extra time that you can put into just going out and setting and moving cameras, whatever. And kind of as time went on, I just got less and less interested in it. By, I would say, 2017, if I had any play in any trail cameras from that point on, it was always just with buddies that had them, and I'd, follow them along while they put them up. Otherwise, at that point, I never really had any that I was putting into play for my own strategy. And because of that, I felt a lot less stressed out, which was a goal of mine. I felt like I was enjoying reading sign and trying to just pick a spot based off of, tracks, rubs, getting a visual, a number of things, but kind of using that woodsmanship skill. And as I started to do that, it's like I feel like things are actually going better, and I'm just in general ultimately learning more, and maybe that's what I even mean by getting better. So I think then by the 2020 season, I started really noticing how many trail cameras I was seeing on public land comparing 2015, 16, 17 season to what all of a sudden I'm seeing in 2020. And ever
Yeah.
since then, it's just kind of become like, I think we might have an issue here. And with my friends, it's one thing. I voice my opinion on it a little bit more easily, but I've been afraid to speak against trail cameras because they're so widely accepted. And I see how upset people can get with things like what happened in Arizona, where they banned trail cameras on public land. And I feel that I just became afraid to voice any concern out loud. And that's where I give you tons of credit like that, dude. Just to get the conversation started is sometimes just challenging. And I felt like I was, I don't know, going to cross a line and make people mad if I ever said anything about my concerns. And ultimately, in a nutshell, my concern is as trail cameras become more available, more affordable, the technology becomes better, they're just going to continue to pop up because more people are going to be using more trail cameras. And yeah, I guess I've been kind of internally battling with that for a while now. And when I saw you also had concerns, that's what kind of got this going.
Yeah, and I think, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, right? And so people can, anyone listening or watching is more than welcome to be mad at me for voicing my opinion, my thoughts on this. That's okay. But I feel like an opinion of mine would be that we'd all be a whole lot better off if it was okay to voice differing opinions about all sorts of stuff before
Yeah.
canceling someone, before
Right.
saying you're an asshole. More like, okay, you have a different opinion, you have a different perspective, rather than, making a witch hunt out of it. How about we hear them out and we talk about different things? We talk about these different ideas and, we try to understand each other. Maybe not agree. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we can better understand where we come from. And so I think that for a long time, the only thing we ever hear about is, how to use this new technology to kill more big bucks, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's like the that's the lion's share of what's out there in the media within the deer hunting world is kill bigger deer, get your 200-inch buck, and anything that you can get to help you do that is better. Bigger is better, more is better, faster is better. Um, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe that's not the case for everyone. Maybe not all of us want that. Maybe that's not what hunting should be for all of us. And I've been on my own personal journey kind of figuring that out. And I think if no one is willing to chat about that, if no one's willing to, you know, like you said, you had this discomfort and concern even for you as someone who is a leader in this space. Even you felt uncomfortable to talk about this. What about just, another hunter who's like, man, my buddies will think I'm crazy if I don't use trail cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I don't use a cell camera, like everybody else is going to kill all the big bucks and I never will. There's probably people thinking all those things and they're afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to explore these ideas. And I think if this conversation in my video does nothing else except for make it okay to like have these questions and thoughts, that's a win as far as I'm concerned. Um, I just think that especially today, we have to, we as hunters, I think more than ever have to be more thoughtful about what we're doing as hunters and how the outside world sees and interprets what we're doing too. And that's a whole other side of this that we haven't brought up yet. But you know, whether or not you like it, hunting is a privilege here in America. It is a thing. It's a privilege that we currently have. I think it should be a right. Like I certainly think it is my right, but it's not guaranteed. And if we do not have the support of the majority, we won't have that privilege anymore. Um, and so, again, people don't like this conversation, but it's just a reality. And the reality is that we do need to think about our public relations as a group of hunters and making sure that what we're doing is done in such a way that the outside world is going to continue to give us a stamp of approval. And I don't know about you, but if I wasn't a hunter and I was thinking about, you know, what are these guys doing? I know there's a buddy down the street. He goes hunting and stuff, and I hear he gets meat and he feeds his family. That sounds pretty cool. Or you go on YouTube and you see, you and Aaron run around public land and you're learning about sign and you're studying this stuff. Like, wow, these guys are really learning about what's going on out there. They seem to really care about these animals and they're working hard. That seems pretty cool. I can get behind that, I guess. But if I just saw someone sitting on their couch playing a video game, basically, and watching something on their screen, and then all of a sudden they stepped out the back door of the rifle and shot something, that's hunting. I don't know about that. I think those are the kinds of things that down the road might be happening and might end up impacting the ability for all of us to hunt in the ways that we see fit. Um, and so that's another part of this that I think we all need to think about. Outside of just your personal choice of what you see as fair chase, what kind of trickle down effect is this going to have on the way that the rest of the world sees hunting? What happens if CNN or MSNBC or who knows what outlet gets a hold of some story about a bunch of deer hunters live streaming wildlife and then going and shooting them as they watch the lives? That's not a good story to get out there, is it?
No, yeah, and that's what I love hearing that from you because that's been my concern as well. Is like if I'm going to have a conversation with a non-hunter, which I think of like college days, for example. I had a lot of non-hunting classmates, and because I was always so obsessed, you know, it was no question that I loved hunting, and I would incorporate that into projects or papers, and um, that was clearly a focus of mine. So to convince my classmates that hunting was okay, there were certain things that I liked to highlight for them. And thinking back on those conversations, something that I certainly wouldn't want to highlight for them is the current day use of trail cameras or the current day focus on shooting the biggest, highest scoring antlered deer.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, I love hunting a big buck. We
Yeah.
all do. Like that as hunters, that's just I guess
Exciting.
yeah, it's exciting and it just gets so many people fired up, but for that to be front and center, I don't necessarily know that that is the best way to win over a non-hunter. And
Yeah.
to your point, I just think that it's very important to keep that in mind when having these conversations.
Yeah. And I think it's a thing like there might be people out there who are okay with using live stream trail cameras and they're hearing this and they're thinking we're hypocrites and they're like these guys are nuts. I'm fine with using live stream cameras. It's just another form of technology. I'm going to use it. But I think there would be some number of those people who might purposefully not mention that to their non-hunting friends. They
Hmm.
wouldn't bring it up in conversation because they would feel like those people would be like, that seems pretty icky. And I think that's a telling thing. Like if you're afraid to tell other people about what you're doing, that might be a clear sign that maybe what you're doing is worth thinking about a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, and here's another thing, Zach. And there is a thing within our community that if you bring up any concern about something within the hunting world, that you are trashing hunters and you're trying to bring the whole thing down. And by way of that, you're not supposed to offer any kind of critique, any kind of concern, any kind of feedback about stuff going on in the hunting world. Because if you're doing that, you're not towing the party line. You're not part of the team if you're doing that. And I've always, to a degree, I get that to a degree, and I agree with that in part. Right, like let's not tear each other down. Let's support other hunters because, right, there's a lot of other people out there who do want to tear us down. Why should we shouldn't be tearing each other down? I agree with that. At the same time, it's really important if you think of us like a family, right? If I've got someone else out there who's trying to beat up my little brother or who's talking crap about my brother, I'm going to stand up for him, and I don't want him beating up my brother. At the same time, sometimes if my brother's doing some dumb stuff or some questionable stuff, I got to sit down with him and have a real chat. And I think that kind of thing is okay within our family. We can have some real chats. We can have differences of opinion and hash it out. And this idea that all new technology is okay or all new technology is can't ever be critiqued, that doesn't even have precedent. If you go way back, if you go back to like, you know, 1700s, 1800s, right? Europeans are spreading across the country. We are taking everything we can when it comes to wildlife, any means necessary to kill a deer, kill a buffalo, put food on the table, put money in your bank account. Like everything was fair game. Everything was going on. And then we realized that wasn't sustainable. We realized that we were losing our buffalo populations. We were sending bird species to extinction. All sorts of stuff was going to hell in a handbasket. And as a hunting community, like this wasn't necessarily just the government. This was hunters and anglers voluntarily saying, "Hey, we gotta tap the brakes. There's some stuff going on here, and we need to do something about it." So many of the laws that eventually got put into place to regulate hunting were first proposed and advocated by, you know, regular hunters and conservation groups, the Boone and Crockett Club. Those were just average hunters who formed together and started proposing these things and advocating these things and putting them in front of politicians to put regulations in place on what kinds of stuff is fair chase, what is okay. So we decided as a hunting community, like, hey, you know what? We shouldn't be jacklighting. We shouldn't be going out at night and shining lights in deer's eyes and shooting them. Is that effective? Super effective.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Is that sporting? Is that ethical? We as a hunting community decided no, it's not. So it's not like we can't do that again.
Right.
It's not that we hunters can't again say, you know what? And I'm not saying that just because I think live stream, I'm not saying this is on par with, shining night hunting for
Sure.
deer. I'm saying that there are many, many examples of this kind of thing in the past where we have said, hey, you know what? We're not going to use grenades to hunt for deer. We're not going to use, night vision tactical sniper rifles with, laser dots. I don't know what it is, but like
Poison arrows.
Yeah, yes. So this should be an okay conversation to have, and this should be it's okay to self-limit, to consider these things. And I'm not saying that I've got to figure it out, but I have a lot of questions about what's going on as
Yeah.
we're on there.
Yeah. To grow individually or as a group, I think critically thinking, being critical of yourself and your decisions is important, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty hard to get better at anything if you're not critically thinking about what you're doing. But I just think that in general, there's certain topics and certain things, and the argument could be made right back and kind of a opposing view that I've thought about often is well, you use on X, don't you? Well, that wasn't a thing back when, my dad was growing up hunting, when he was my age even. It was paper maps and that was it. So the argument can go down a whole bunch of different um, rabbit holes, but I guess as far as the camera thing goes and where I started to feel concerned was when dealing with public land. That's where I started to see that there could be a pretty major issue. And what really got me, and like a couple examples would be personal experiences of being on specific public lands and just seeing dozens of cell cameras on a particular like roadblock, and every ridge that you're going down there's just camera, a couple hundred yards camera, a couple hundred yards camera. And then I've had other friends from other heavily hunted areas that are talking about pulling up to a scrape, walking up on a scrape on a logging road, and there's already 3 cell cameras on that one scrape. It starts to get to a point for me where I'm concerned about sharing the land. If we're actually sharing the land, where's the line drawn as far as, comparing somebody who, has a job, they've got a job that pays well, they have, a certain situation that allows them to purchase these cameras and then put them out on the land that we can all use. But then he's hunting the same land that somebody that just wants to go bird watching or hiking, or a hunter that's in college that, can barely buy food is hunting. At what point does it become unfair? Is that something that pops into your mind too? Because to me, it's like we're definitely getting there, right? Like
Yep.
if I'm walking a ridge and I'm seeing really even more than one camera period, it's like this is getting kind of crazy, and I just don't feel like it's sharing anymore. It's just I've got this thing that gives me all this info, and this is this huge advantage to where like I feel like the for me at least the conversation and where the line is drawn changes a little bit if it's on private land. But on public land, it's like you start dealing with cell cameras and like just completely like doors are wide open to do whatever you want, leave them as long as you want. And it's like I don't know, it starts getting pretty weird to me.
Yeah, and not only that, but they're also it's almost this isn't maybe the right word, but it almost feels like an invasion of privacy or of an invasion of like your experience in some kind of way.
Oh
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. That yes, I.
Like,
That's actually like why I personally dislike it the most is I do not like getting my picture taken because it's just like I don't know, it's just weird. Simply the fact that it's weird. It also
yeah,
definitely gives away where you've been, which is
yeah,
not ideal for me either. But like, yeah, I just don't. I don't. That's where things really get strange. It's like I don't want my picture taken. You know, if it's like if you ask, sure, but whatever. I don't
right.
know.
And again, like the live stream thing, if that if that becomes as ubiquitous as everything else, like that just ramps all that up to another really weird level when you just have like guys just sitting there watching everything that's going on, watching you move by, watching me drop my climbing sticks and look like an idiot out there, and they see all the
Yeah.
dumb stuff I do. No.
Yeah.
um, right? Um, but I just think that it just raises all sorts of like really weird or concerning like hypotheticals. Like another public land situation. Imagine this scenario you're laying out where some guys have got their cameras littered all across the ridgeline. What happens when November 1st or 2nd, a big buck starts trolling down that ridge and five different people all have their cameras pinging off and they're all in live stream mode. And so they're watching, okay, he just passed through here. I'm going to slip out of my stand. And you've got like five different guys all converging real time trying to cut off this deer. Imagine that in gun season.
Oh,
I mean, talk about like safety issues even at that point.
totally.
So there's just it, when I posted that video, I got a lot of folks upset about it or saying that I'm hypocritical or who am I to judge this when I use other technology, like you said, um, and and all I'm trying to do here is raise like, hey, we gotta really tap the brakes and think about some of these things. Is all I'm saying. I don't necessarily have the solution. I don't necessarily. I'm not here to tell you like, oh, get rid of this, and this, and then we're all good. That's not what I'm trying to say or do. Um, but I just see like the direction things are heading is a direction that I'm not super stoked for my son to experience. I'm not particularly proud to be like advertising that to the rest of the world. Like, oh, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. And if we can do this now, imagine where things are headed, right? Um, so I think I just am I think we just got to be cautious for a lot of reasons.
Hmm.
For like and this I'm going to go a little woo woo here, Zach, but right, hunting is as close to a sacred spiritual, experience as you can get, regardless of what your faith or whatever is. It's just there's nothing more serious than
Hmm.
pursuing and taking a life. Like there's nothing else in the world, I think, that is more serious than that. So if ever there was going to be a thing in which we would be willing to think really hard about what we're doing, how we're doing it, it should be this. More important than the rules of basketball, more important than the rules of how you build a truck, more important than, you know, whatever it is. Like if we're going to go out there and take a life, we better be damn sure that we're doing it in a thoughtful, appropriate way. And I know a lot of people put a lot of thought and care into how they do these kinds of things, but it's really easy for technology to slip in and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And before you know it, and I almost feel this way for myself. Like this whole live stream thing was like it was one of those straws that breaks the camel's back kind of moment where I was like, whoa, what is going on? do I really need all this stuff? Do I really need to be using all these things? Do I need this thing and that thing and so many things plugged in? Like stuff really like it creeps up on you, and all of a sudden you realize how much you are using all these things and what that does do to the experience. Um, Gosh, how many hunters do you know they're just like glued to their phones now, Zach? Even when they're hunting.
Tons.
Um, I think if we turn the clock back a decade or two, we might actually enjoy it more. Not saying that we should do that, but I personally have thought about, man, what if I stopped using these cameras altogether? What if I just didn't bring my phone out there anymore and just like just soaked in what's around me?
Lived in the
Uh,
moment.
yeah, that might not be such a bad thing.
Yeah. I think that everyone would certainly enjoy it more. There's like so much less stress. You can watch it just, as soon as people do something different, I suppose, and they kind of let those things go, it's just like, man, that was pretty sweet. I didn't worry about it. I wasn't worried about what buck I was going to shoot.
Yeah,
You just know. Like, you have those conversations with people, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty freeing. And also, a thing that I always say to people is, you're good enough. You are good enough. You don't need that. Trust yourself. Use that as confidence and use what you've learned. You use your past experiences. Like, we all know that there's certain amounts of sign that tell us that I don't really need to know what's in here. There's something that I'm willing to shoot, or maybe like
yeah,
three of them in here,
yeah,
And I think when that's the case, it for me certainly makes it more fun. Like, I love that element of surprise. I can sit there, and I'm a big daydreamer in general, so I constantly am visualizing which, you know, rack configuration is coming through the woods. And
yeah,
when it comes to the cameras, the other thing that always ends up popping up in my mind as well is the trophy. Like trying to shoot the biggest animal, and there are positives of taking a mature animal out of the herd. Like, that's definitely true. But when the focus is so stuck on antlers, that's another one of those things that I don't necessarily want to highlight for a non-hunter. Is that,
yeah,
yeah, the majority of whitetail bow hunters, fit into this category of trying to shoot the biggest antlered animal. And, past that, it's like, I don't really always know that there's a ton of thought in it other than I want to get one bigger than anybody else. And like, that's just
right.
a kind of a common theme. And again, not to say that you shouldn't try to do those things, but I don't know that that's the best look. And that's something that in general I do just think it's important to kind of pump the brakes on for everybody and be accepting of if people want to do other things or have, shoot something that you wouldn't. I mean, I don't know. That's such a weird subject too that kind of plays into all this to me a little bit. It's like, if you want to shoot the biggest antler deer, one thing I guarantee that's going to help you is get a shit ton of cameras out there. Like,
Yeah,
just, yeah, litter the whole place. You're going to find him. You're going to know
yeah,
where he is. And then when you start talking about how weird it is that you can now sit at home, you don't even have to go out there for however long a camera lasts these days. I mean, heck, if you put solar panels on it, you may never have to go to it. And it really starts getting pretty crazy. And I also think that it makes, in the long run, a whole generation of hunters that will never be able to be as good or true woodsmen as the generations before. Like,
yeah,
we've kind of stunted our growth there with
yeah,
trail cameras, in my opinion, where it's, if that's what you're using to find these big bucks, it's like, think about guys that didn't have a trail camera, like the guys that were getting the big bucks then, or just anything in general, or just going out and using their skills. I remember reading books when I was younger of guys talking about following a buck just off of his tracks, and like, when I was a kid, that just got me so excited, and I feel like that generation's dying. I mean, they are. I mean, they're getting to an age where they're not hunting like they once
yeah.
were, and I think that it's kind of important to keep that in perspective.
You bring up something I've thought about a lot too, and I've seen a lot. This last year especially, just just in talking to people on my podcast, I'm hearing so many people talk about how cell cameras help their hunt. And again, I'm saying all this as a cell camera user. So like, I have used it myself. So I'm not, I want to, I guess I am I'm hypocritical in a way in that I am using these things. I am using them with questions and concerns though. But so
But
with that
well,
said,
I guess to back you up though, you're critically thinking of that, right? So you're sitting here saying like, yeah, I have, but just because you have, and a friend of mine said this to me just this weekend. He said, just because you've had an opinion that changes doesn't mean that you were wrong as a person or even that your opinion was wrong. It's just that now
right.
you have a different opinion. That's
Yep.
okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. You don't have to like stick to your guns for forever, because if
Yeah.
you do that, then there's never going to
See?
be any change or any difference
Yeah.
difference in opinion. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I love that. I love that how like in politics people get labeled as a flip flopper if they ever change their thoughts on something as a negative. And I'm thinking in many cases like that's good. Like growth
Yes.
is good.
Yeah.
Having flexibility with like what you take in throughout the course of your life and then adjusting how you see things, that sounds like a good thing to me.
Hmm.
Um, but so to my point, um, so many people I've talked to over the last year have been using cameras and talking about how they're using them, and I've used them as I described. But what I'm seeing and what I think some people are starting to realize is that yes, they are a very useful, effective tool, but people are now leaning on them too heavily. And you are missing opportunities because you're waiting, you're chasing pictures, you're waiting for a buck to show up on camera, and that buck's all over the place, just not in your camera. And so I think we're going to start seeing more and more folks see that they are missing out on opportunities. They are actually less effective as hunters because they are too hyper focused on what this 10-yard by 10-yard square of land it has on it and not thinking about all the rest of the landscape around it, which you would have learned about if you were actually out there hunting, actually
Hmm.
out there scouting. But now you've got, well, I got 3 cameras up on my 100 acres, and I'm not going to go out there till the buck
I've
shows
got
up.
it covered. I've got it
Right.
covered.
Exactly. And that guy or girl is going to, I think in many cases, A, miss out on a lot of fun in the woods, B, not learn as much, and C, I'm betting they might actually be less successful.
Yeah.
Um, so there might end up being a little bit of a shift back just because of like that simple fact that people want to be effective and people will start to figure out that, yeah, these are helpful tools, but you really need all the other stuff to really have it all figured out and to have fun. Like I think it goes back to like, and maybe this, I I think everyone goes through a journey as a hunter, and we're all at different places in our journey, and we all progress along that journey at different speeds. But I think a lot of people you hear about like you're getting started, and you just want like, how do I get a deer? And then it's how can I shoot a bunch of deer? And then you get to the point where like, man, I want to kill a big one. And then it's I want to kill a bigger one, and then a bigger one, or a bigger one than my buddy, or whatever. But a lot of people eventually get to the point where it becomes less about what you put on the ground and more about the experience. And I think that that's a really great place to get to, that I'm just starting to get to myself. And the how matters more than the what.
Hmm.
And I think if we start thinking about the how more with our deer hunting and with a lot of things, we might enjoy the experience more in the end. And so, to like your earlier, just concern over the obsession with the outcome, like within our community, like the obsession with big giant bucks, which again, I love as much as the next guy. But I'm realizing now that how I go about this stuff and what the experience outside of just the outcome looks like. Outside did I kill a deer or not? It's all the other stuff that actually matters, that actually makes it so much fun, that actually makes it something that we love to share with other people and to do and spend our time on. And and maybe that'll be something that people start, realizing more and more too, is like they use these cameras and they get the live stream thing, like, oh man, it's pretty sweet. You can watch what they're doing. And that would be fun. Like, I'm sure I love
Oh,
watching deer. I love watching deer. So would I like to see them? Yeah, sure. But I think we'll also start to realize like we're losing something too. That's maybe, in my opinion, probably is not worth it.
yeah. You know something that's funny? I don't have cameras, right? But my buddies still have them, and when I'm hunting with them, when they have their cameras and they're getting these pictures on their phones and stuff, yeah, I love looking at it. You know how I use a camera these days is when they're moving, even if it's in a different state that I'm even in, on my buddies, and my buddies getting pictures of it. It gets me just excited, right? It's like, oh man, they're moving somewhere. It may be down in Iowa, but like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it gets
It is
me
fun.
excited.
Yeah.
It's fun. It really is fun. And honestly, from a private land perspective, I don't hunt private land currently, but I think about like having them at my grandpa's property. I don't hunt there currently or haven't for a while now, but I would like to see what's going on there. So yeah, I think that having them in some fashion isn't all bad. For me, the biggest concern is the public land thing and like sharing the land. It doesn't feel like sharing the land, and it does feel like an invasion of privacy. And it doesn't feel like we're on an equal playing field, because if I'm out here choosing to do it one way, but somebody that just is willing to invest more money into cameras or has a view that, having as many cell cameras on public land as possible is okay, then to me, we're not playing on the same playing field anymore. And I think of it less about me, but more of somebody that's less experienced than me. Like I always try to think of like the high school or college aged hunter, right? They're generally on a budget. They're probably struggling to find places to go. It's a time in a lot of people's lives where they dive into hunting for kind of the first time. Maybe they have some experiences with family or something, but they're like, hey, I'm going to try this. I'm in a new spot, whatever. When you compare that situation to somebody with a lot more experience, or again, money invested into it, the situation in the playing field changes a lot just like that by littering a place with cameras. And then I guess I just don't see that as being very fair. Now, on the other hand, it's like somebody that has a ton of experience and knows how to pick up on sign and whatever without the help of these new technologies, you're still playing on the same playing field. It's just different experience. I mean, that's no different than, a senior point guard for a basketball team playing against a freshman point guard on a basketball team. Yeah, I mean, the senior definitely has a upper hand. He's got way more experience.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that. They're still on the same court playing the same game,
Right.
especially because these things cost money. That's a big part of it, where they cost money, and then that becomes very unfair. And I don't know. One other like kind of argument that was brought up to me, and I don't want to miss it, was not everybody has the same amount of time. And
Yeah.
the argument was directly against me and THP. Like, you guys go, you have this time, and
Yeah.
you can go do those things, and we don't all have that same amount of time. And I guess I've thought about that a lot, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that criticism, because I try to look at that often and be realistic. Is that how much is that a factor? And certainly it is a factor. I recognize that me, like you, we get a pretty crazy amount of time to do what we love.
Yeah.
But I also still think that what it kind of plays into for me is the focus on the outcome. To me, that's telling me that the focus is the outcome. And I know that for the most part, that outcome isn't putting food on the table. When it comes to trail cameras, it's about putting more
Yeah.
antler inches on the wall, not about putting food on. Now, if it's about putting food on the table, that's a little bit different story. But because it's about antlers and it's about focusing on the outcome, that's where it still gets weird. It's like, yeah, we have more time, but like, if you're just using the cameras to get a bigger antler, I don't know. It gets weird, man. It's a tough one.
Yeah. And I think that's where it comes down to, like, everyone's going to be in their own unique position. And those critiques, like, there are people who have way less time, and they would look at trail cameras as something that absolutely helps them have a shot in which they maybe wouldn't have otherwise the way we do with time. And
Mhm.
all that is true. And so if someone wants to use a tool, whether it be a more effective weapon or it be a cell camera or it be online maps or it be any way of using money, I guess buying paying for a lease, whatever it is, like those are all personal decisions. It all comes down to what the experiences you want, given your circumstances and your situation and all that kind of stuff. And I think that instead of like someone saying, well, you're an asshole, Zach, for thinking about this because, I don't have the same situation as you. So you're a jerk for bringing up your position. I don't think, I think the more like helpful way to think about this is just like, hey, this is how I'm feeling about my situation, about how I'm thinking about this technology, and how I'm going to choose to make decisions about using it. So I guess
Mhm.
maybe what I'm trying to say here is I don't know what the right thing is for everybody else. All I know is that I feel really uncomfortable personally about where things are going with
Yeah.
cell camera. Live streaming is way too far for me. Instant stuff with cell cameras is too far for me. And there's a lot of technology now that I have concerns and worries about. I'm thinking about these things. I'm trying to have a critical mind about what that means for my hunting and my experience. And I'm publicly sharing that,
Yeah.
not to say that everyone who thinks different than me is jerk or wrong, simply as an illustration of like, hey, it's okay to think about these things. It's okay to go against the mainstream. And it might be useful if we all take a little time to talk about this and think about this. That's all I was trying to do with that post. And I think if that is what comes out of this conversation too, I think it's a useful thing and a good
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's really my goal with having the conversation too, is just get friends talking about it, right?
yeah,
Everybody still, for the most part, can make their own decisions because these things aren't illegal. Some
yeah,
places, a very few places, they're illegal, but for the most part, it's still legal. And, I think that there's no harm in talking with your friends and seeing, like, hey, where do you stand on this? And, what do we do? Do we want to make any changes, or are we cool? Or, like,
yeah,
if it were to come up in conversation as far as like a lot of states have that ability to voice your opinion when it comes to regulations and everything. Are we going to talk about this, or are we not going to talk about this? And I think I
yeah,
couldn't agree more, man. I'm not sitting here saying that, I think that you suck if you are using a trail camera. I'm not. I'm just saying, I guess the reason that I really wanted to bring it up is I just don't really ever hear anything but positive things and how they really help. And it really pains me that, like, one of the things that I hear people say that really just, like, kind of makes me feel really bad is when a younger guy or gal says, they're telling me about their hunting experience, and then they say, well, I don't have any cameras yet. It's like, dude, yet? Or I don't have a tree stand yet. I can't really afford one. It's like, you don't need that. Like,
don't worry about it.
you got a license and a weapon that you feel confident and efficient with, then that's good enough. Go have an experience and go learn something. And, like, you don't have to shoot a big buck to be impressive, Like, if somebody tries to learn and really critically thinks about what they did from a hunting strategy perspective, that's a good hunter. I could care less about what they've got, whether it's 0 deer or 100 deer, or, however many places, or if that's public or private. If you're willing to critically think about it and you really sit there and break things down, then you're a good hunter. Like, that takes, it's just like the same thing
Yeah,
with, like, sports. You know, there's people that are naturally gifted and there's people that aren't as much, but, the person that doesn't have the gift of extremely athletic, if they work really hard and they think, well, what can I do to utilize my strengths? That makes a good player, And I just think same thing goes for hunting. As long as you're, you know, questioning things and trying to learn and get better, then you are a good hunter. And just be proud of that and know that you're good enough, man. It's always like a big thing for me is like, you are good enough. Everybody is. Like, just have confidence
and,
in that.
yeah. And this gets to like you brought this up earlier, like at the root of a lot of like the stuff. Sorry, very loud car next to me.
That's all right.
At the root of a lot of the stuff with trail cameras is the obsession with the outcome, right? And the big deer thing, or also like, am I good enough, or trying to seem good enough, or trying to impress your friends, and so I don't know if this is. I mean, this is a totally separate conversation, probably. But when it comes to like the impacts of social media or just hunting media in general, and this like comparison culture now that we live in, almost where it feels like you're constantly trying to one up someone else, or feel like you can live up to the Joneses, or whatever. There's this unfortunate thing within our family where everyone feels like you're not good enough unless you're killing big giant bucks every time, because you see this other person on Instagram who's killed like 10 giants this year or whatever. And it seems so easy. Or it seems like when you look at the phone on November 5th, like, another one, everyone's got one. I suck. How come I can't get anything? Right? I mean, that's
Oh yeah.
the side effect of all this technology and all this media and stuff out there. And I fell prey to it all too, man. And I have slowly, like, and I got to the point where I was like bumming about it a lot, and I was feeling crappy about myself and wasn't having fun the way it should be. And I started realizing that, man, if the more you can turn off that noise and get back to just like hunting your own hunt and hunting for the experience and not caring at all about what other people think about what you're doing as far as how big a deer you shoot or how many deer you've gotten, like, that just makes the experience so much better. Got me back to really loving it and having fun again as soon as I could stop trying to be someone else or caring what somebody else thinks about. And that alone has been a huge shift for me. And so I think that goes back to, making these choices about hunting. You've inspired me, Zach, when you first talked about, I don't know, like a year ago or something on one of our podcasts, you talked about how you weren't using cameras, and someone else brought it up a year or two ago. It might have been Donnie Vincent or someone who's like, yeah, I decided to do a year without cameras. And I started thinking just recently, I wonder, that would be pretty cool. Like, I love cameras. I love seeing the pictures. It's super interesting, but it also might be really cool to put it all away again and just 100% be surprised and have to use all those other things and have to envelop myself in the landscape. That might be a really awesome experience. And it seemed like totally out of the question. But when I hear about a couple other people doing it, it always says like, hey, that's an idea.
Yep.
That's not that crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if nothing else, like, just like raising these things, like, hey, this is a possible thing. It might be pretty cool.
Yep.
Not only is like the other thing not for us, maybe, like, you could position like, okay, live stream cameras, I was saying, is too far for me, right? The opposite approach to that we could be having right now is like, hey, no cameras is pretty cool. You might want to consider it.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's a cool thing to consider. And I enjoy that when I go do public land hunts and I have no idea. Like, that's a really fun thing. It might be fun to go back to that on my private land stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And comes back to, I think, like the experience. Less so putting giant bucks in the ground, more so what's this whole thing look, feel, experience? What's that like?
I think kind of what I keep saying too is you are good enough. Like, you have used the cameras to do it. A lot of people have, right? But it's like that's also helped you see exactly what that sign in that area looks like. So something that I really enjoy about trail cameras on private land is when I go scout those private land pieces, I can compare that sign where I know there was a buck using that landscape, this much. I can now go to public land and say, okay, this is probably good enough. Like, this is pretty good sign because this is pretty similar to what it looked like in a spot where I know there was a big buck because
Right.
a buddy had a camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty cool. And then my favorite story that I have from this whole past deer hunting season, I want to tell it to you because it's super satisfying to not have the camera. So I was in Minnesota, and there was this piece and I was with my buddy Keith, and there was this piece that did a drive-by, and we noticed that across the road there was a winter wheat field, so it was green over there. And from the road where we could see that public boundary, it was super dense in there. So we wanted to go in and scout this area, and we went in and kind of just honestly meandered our way through the whole thing. Didn't really have a real specific agenda. It was middle of the day when it was hot. And we ended up getting back into that corner that we could see from the road, and all of a sudden run into this mega scrape line, like one that you know, kind of dream of, not even a licking branch, which is usually a pretty good sign, you know, at least in my experience. And
Yeah.
it was like, man, we got to come back in here. But the tricky part was it was so dense in there that we needed some sort of major condition change to be able to effectively sneak in there without blowing it up. So we were looking at the forecast, and we ended up seeing probably 4 days later that there was going to be a super windy morning. So into the night, it was going to continue to get windier and windier. And then that next morning, we would use that wind to sneak in. So the day before the wind came, we did another drive-by in that same gravel road, and we were checking tracks going across the road. So we know there's scrapes and rubs in this public land. We found big beds as well and the edge of some cattails. But then we were checking tracks crossing the road, and there's just a plethora of doe and fawn tracks going from public to private and back and forth. But just as we were about to call it and go to where we were going to hunt that evening, I noticed this monster track. Like, I'm talking stupid big. You know, it's indented into the gravel road, and it just makes all the other tracks kind of look silly. And there's multiple of them to where, like, you can tell that's his track going across that road, and everything else just is kind of like a mark in the dust. And that's like, okay, well, that track's headed straight in there. You know, in theory, he's there right now, but we got to wait for tomorrow morning to have the conditions to get in there. So we end up going back the next morning, and we're almost to our setup. We're using that wind, sneaking in super quietly, and we broke a twig, and we were, no kidding, like 5 yards from where we were going to set up, which we had picked when we were in there. So we could see these scrapes, and it's also 6 minutes before legal light. And Keith, I'll throw him under the bus. He broke something. He broke something, and which it really isn't a big deal in the moment. We had both been breaking stuff along the way, and every time that happened, we would stop because we knew we had time. And as soon as that thing broke and we were close to those scrapes, though, it was like deer's moving, and it's moving towards us. So we just tucked down up against the tree, and we got enough wind to cover us doing that, and we just kind of sit there and we can hear this deer moving. And again, it is 6 minutes before legal light, so it's one of those deals where you can see, but the camera can't film anything at all. Like, it's still black. Like, Keith was still in night vision, like infrared, so you can see me glassing him. And here he comes straight through, 25 yards, and he's right there broadside, walks straight to that biggest scrape with the no licking branch, torches it, and then goes straight back the way that he came from. And I'll never know for sure, but what I saw was like through my bino, it was a no-brainer shooter, no-brainer mature buck, but just looked like a tank, like big buck, junk all up on his bases. And then, he walks away, and of course then we sit there all day and literally did not see another deer that day, and ended up hunting in that area more, and saw more sign that kind of told us that this buck does actually have junk on his bases. Like, we'd come across these trees that would just be shredded in a way that a typical buck rub doesn't look like, you know? And it's just like, man, that's kind of a cool, to me, series of events that tell you that buck's there. And then to see the track, to see him enough to where it's still a little bit of a ghost, but, I'm pretty sure that I saw 10 points with junk on his bases, and then to see more sign to tell you that that's true. It's just, that's really fun. It really is fun and satisfying. And while we didn't get him, that's honestly probably one of my favorite stories from this season, just because of the series of events that took place. And I had a good time with that. I just really loved it. Learned a lot from that. So
I can 100% relate. I mean, that's the beauty. And I guess if anything, I guess I will say, rather than telling anybody else what they should do, I think from this conversation, I am inspired personally to continue pulling back less and less on the different things I'm doing, because I think as I'm talking about these things and thinking about these things and hearing about what you're saying too, like, I just see the joy in that. And like I really do enjoy my private land stuff that I do with cameras. No
Mm-hmm.
doubt about it. Like I enjoy studying these deer. I love learning specific deer. Like that is a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. And I do it. And I'm gonna keep on doing that
Mm-hmm.
in my own way.
Mm-hmm.
But when I go and do these trips where I go to public land, there's something that's so different and special and fun about the mystery,
Yep.
about not knowing what's out there, about having to just put the pieces together on the ground. Like my favorite hunt last year might have been a hunt where I was on a brand new piece, figuring it out, didn't know what was out there, had no cameras, had zero idea. And to see that first nice buck that first morning, like, oh man, yeah, there we go. Or that actually was the night before when I was glassing. I actually got up on a hilltop, was glassing river bottom, and then all of a sudden here's like, first like, oh, that's a nice little buck, and oh, there's a deer and there's a doe, and then you see this mega giant step out that you had no idea could have possibly been out here. I mean, that kind of thing is amazing too.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that I have had the good luck to be able to go have those kinds of experiences. Um, and I think when we make these choices about the tools we use, the technology we use, we can give ourselves special, unique, interesting hunting experiences that go above and beyond like the importance of like what you killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this whole conversation, I think maybe is part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I appreciate you taking the time, Mark. I think that, yeah, just if anything, maybe gets people thinking about it, talking about amongst their friends about these different, lines in the sand, I guess. And
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you also having the ability to speak on it and just get that conversation started, because I don't think we would be having this conversation specifically if it wasn't for you, stepping up and saying something about your concerns. And I think that, I mean, I'll be honest, I feel like I just chickened out in a lot of ways because it's something that's been building in my head. And then when I saw you speak up on it, it was like, okay, this is an opportunity for us to just have a conversation about it. And yeah, so thank you. And I
Yeah,
appreciate
you're
you
welcome.
taking the time, man.
Yeah, right back at you. Thank you, Zach. Thanks for inspiring me to contemplate maybe a trail camera free season coming up here pretty soon. And for all the all the good work you're doing, man. I appreciate it too.
Well, thanks, man.